Thank you very much. Thank you all for having me here. It's a great honor. I'm truly touched because I spent a lot of time in the 80s and 90s and earlier this decade, or the noughties at least, working on the front line and fence lines with folk like you and know the hard work you do and the struggle you're in. As a prelude to what I want to inspire you with tonight, I don't want any of it to sound like I don't understand the struggle or that it's not easy or that I don't understand that it's not easy to do what you do, and I really respect it and admire it and thank you very much for it. Because without you holding the line, these guys would have their way. But what I'm here to say tonight is that the good news is you may only have to hold that line for another 5 to 10 years. And after that, we might be done with this nonsense of fossil fuels once and for all. So that's what I'm hoping to get into. Just to say, Sungevity is a company that started about 6 years ago to deliver easy, affordable residential solar solutions to people. We sell it online. We are a pretty convenient service, and we do it as a leased proposition for customers. The logo is a ring of houses making up the world, but it's also in its heart a stop sign to say we want to stop climate change. And we're a couple of hundred pretty mission-oriented people in Oakland, California, employing a couple hundred more across the country, serving thousands of customers, saving them money on their electricity bill already, saving CO2 from the atmosphere. We also have a platform called Sungevity.org, which any of your organizations are willing to sign up at, wherein you get us customers and we give you money, what we would otherwise pay for advertising and marketing. We gave $1 million to nonprofits last year, and we're now taking this business model global to Australia and the Netherlands in the first case, and we're also trying to incubate a bunch of other really important companies that are needed to make this ecosystem really evolve rapidly. Like Mosaic, which some of you might have heard about, an online platform which is an opportunity to invest in the solar industry. So that's sort of what Sungevity does. I also am an activist. I wrote a book about a lot of this stuff last year called Rooftop Revolution. I wanted to try to explain why cylinder was just complete nonsense and electoral spin, and how solar power not can, I should have called it, is going to save us from dirty energy, both our economy and our planet. The reason I have this photo is that someone sent it to me. It's a guy on a train reading my book. So it's the only proof I have that anyone other than my mother actually has read most of it. I don't know how it went from there. But if you want, I have a couple of copies here tonight, and you can also get it at rooftoprevolutionbook.com or online at iTunes. You can download it as a sample and stuff like that. And a lot of what I will tell you tonight is in there, but hopefully this will be an easier version. What I wanted to pick up on was what Josh Fox finished with, this thought that, you know, we are being occupied, our country is being taken over, your lives, your houses, your farms are being invaded by a force which has sadly invaded many families and communities for hundreds of years around the world. And there's a struggle that you're at the front line of every day over power both literal and figurative. The literal is the electricity we get from it, and also all the other ways power is manifest through the internal combustion engine and the mobility services that we get from that thing. I believe that electricity is at the core of the power we need as a society, and we can get electricity by other means. So, you know, I acknowledge what you're in, the trenches and the struggle that we're in, and I try to give it kind of a name, which is that we're fighting King Kong. Kong is coal, oil, nukes, and gas. And we've been fighting them for a long time without really knowing it with DEUS, which is Distributed Energy Utility Solutions. Because utility is what we're actually after. What does the power supply, what does the electricity do for us? It gives us utility. That's what that word originally meant. We can do things like entertain ourselves or educate ourselves or run machines or move things around, ourselves included. That's what we go underground for, is the ability to do those things. And there are various ways to get there. The main way we get there in this day and age, disturbingly, is through King Kong, or the behest or a thrall of King Kong, coal, oil, nukes, and gas, I'm sorry. And I just want to remind you what a dumb kind of 19th 19th century business model and technology set this is. It's all solar energy. Energy is different from power, right? Energy's up there in space, coming down on Earth. And sunlight fell on Earth 200 million years ago in most cases and grew plants through a thing called photosynthesis, which then died and were fossilized. And then someone came and either dug them up or fracked them out of the ground, in your case, to burn them, mostly to boil water to drive a machine which was invented in about the 1500s, called the steam engine. That's how we still get electricity on this Earth today. It's kind of crazy. I mean, the gas industry is slightly different. They've kind of, in the large part, cut out the steam boiling bit. So they're not dependent on Brownian motion, which is insanely inefficient. But they're doing all this lunacy and idiocy to get 200-million-year-old sunlight. Because they've got a machine called the steam turbine, which they can control and can extract a lot of money out of through the regulated monopolies they were granted by our governments about 100 years ago. So the business model that went with the technology set is also over 100 years old. Basically, these are deals where they said, we'll keep the lights on, Chicago, if you become Chicago Edison, and you promise to keep the lights on, and we'll give you access to that market so long as you do keep those lights on, and we'll let you grow the market by 3% per annum, or at least the rate base, and always make a profit. And they didn't expose them to any competition over the last century. There's been no major innovation or improvement in that machine since about 1894. The gas turbine being an exception to that to some degree. But broadly speaking, this is what we're dealing with. What we're trying to bring about is what I call distributed energy utility solutions, which is a much more dynamic web-like set of systems to get electricity. It's based on solar energy still, and I believe, and the reason we started a business in the space, that photovoltaics will be the core component of it. Photovoltaics are the solar cells invented in this country, in New Jersey in 1954, which basically blow that other machine away with their simplicity and their beauty and their brilliance. It's a machine that sits in the sun, and every photon that falls fresh on the Earth every morning gets converted into electricity at a rate of about 15%. So, think about that other system of 200 million years ago, sunlight fell and was converted at some lesser percentage through photosynthesis, and then waited around for 200 million years, then dug up, then burnt to boil water, blah, blah, blah. We got, at the point of use, the same electrons that we need to run our things without going through all those middlemen and all that inefficiency. And I can't remember who it was, probably Buckminster Fuller or someone that said, if you end up with something at the end of your production cycle, at the end of your design and engineering phase that isn't beautiful, you probably haven't come up with the right thing. This thing, I think, is beautiful. We take sunlight fresh every morning and turn it into our basic needs and deliver all the services we not only take for granted, but need in the modern world. Light, heat, mobility, entertainment, education, the World Wide Web, blended margaritas, whatever you like. We can do that with this machine. Why are we going to win this struggle of King Kong versus Deus? Someone mentioned earlier physics. One of them is just like the reality of the numbers. All of the coal, oil, gas, and nuclear stockpiled uranium known to humans would be about 20 days worth. And say they find some more, or they invent some new silly technology to suck some more out of the ground. We can frack more rock and get more extracted. They might push that out to 30 days in their wildest dreams. But it's still inevitable that we end up tapping the sun, because that's the only way this would make sense. So just that big reality is one reason. Another reason, which I think is very important and I really stressed in this book, is that going into the 21st century, as we've changed and dematerialized our industry, jobs are at a premium. We know this, coming out of the Great Recession. Our energy supply is more job dense and necessarily will be than their energy supply, if you will. Just to give you some numbers on that, the solar industry in 2011 to 2012, the last year of records, grew from about 105,000 employees in the United States to 120,000. So it added 15,000 jobs on a baseline just over 100,000 jobs. Name another industry in America that added 15,000 jobs over a baseline of 100,000. I don't think there is one. I know the fracking guys claim lots of job growth, but I still don't think they'd be up there in those numbers. You know, when they say, we've created so much employment in Dakota that there's only 0.3% unemployment, it's like Dakota has the population of Brooklyn. That's not solving for the unemployment crisis in America. It may be good for the people in Dakota that want jobs, but what about all the other people whose jobs are being affected and all the rest that you guys know so well? We, on the other hand, are actually creating real jobs that are permanent and non-offshoreable jobs, because 3 out of 4 of these are not in factories, despite the debate around solar. They're in the sale, the financing, the installation, and the maintenance of the solar systems. So they're in the community, and they're generally good jobs, like the ones we've created at Sungevity. And as jobs become more of a premium in politics, I think this is going to be one of the reasons why we win going forward. And just to compare us to coal for a second, which is the big kahuna in the King Kong setup, coal employs 160,000 people in America. Remember what I said solar employs? 120,000. Coal provides over a third of our electricity. Less than a decade ago, it was over 50% of our electricity. That's how capital intensive they are. All those miners that we're worried about keeping in employment, Wyoming and Appalachia and wherever, who are going to lose their jobs anyway. The Appalachian jobs are gone. There may be 80,000 people in America. Then the railroaders and the power plant operators total, maybe double it. So you've got 160,000 jobs in a third to a half of electricity supply. Solar is right now less than 1% of electricity supply and employs 120,000. By any measure, we will be 10% of electricity supply within the decade. So jobs is a big bit. There's also things like land. We use a lot less. In fact, we don't even use land. We use rooftops and the skins of the built environment. Actually, this is out of date. I wrote this book a year or more ago. Recent studies and figures and calculations around efficiency improvements in photovoltaics suggest that 1% of the land surface of the world could power all needs for the world's electricity consumption. You know, it's really just a question of wanting to do it. If 2 out of 4 faces of the built environment were producing solar electricity, it's been calculated the United States could get its required power from existing technology with no leaps of faith or anything like it. There's also water, which I mentioned before. 49% of water in this country is diverted to steam boiling. It's kind of crazy. 42% goes to agriculture. The rest is for other human uses like drinking and fracking. So, in a water-scarce world, we're not going to continue steam boiling, is my point. And then there's just the political reality that people like this stuff. As has been mentioned many times here today, this is not red or blue, this is not Democrat or Republican, this is just smart. This is just better. I first learned this running a campaign for Greenpeace in California in 2001. We ran a solar bond initiative, so getting us the city of San Francisco to issue bonds for $100 million of solar and wind financing. We got 73% of the vote. I've been doing electoral organizing since 1983. I've never experienced something that got 3/4 of the people, even in San Francisco, to vote for it. And you can watch the reaction. The politicians pricked up their ears and paid attention. Schwarzenegger ran on a pro-solar campaign to become the Republican governor of California just a few years after, because this stuff is popular. And it makes sense. All culture throughout all time has valued sunlight, right? It's all health, it's all life, it's everything that we value. The Irish blessing, what's better than the sun shining in the face? That's what we're selling. That's what we're doing. That's what we're tapping. Not death itself, which is what we dig up from underground. Sunlight that died. So it's a powerful reason why I think we'll win. But this is the big game. And I'll spend a little bit of time on this graph, so get used to it. This is the market. This is economics. I mean, people don't understand science and politics, and they certainly don't understand economics if they don't think solar is going to rise and rise and rise and take out a lot of fossil fuels market. And the reason is this. This is a graph of real electricity price since electricity sort of became generalized in America about 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago. It actually went down initially in price for what you paid on the streets of Chicago or New York or wherever for your electricity supply, because they generalized and standardized steam turbines, and they made them better for a while to get out. And so it dips a little bit at the start of the century, and the band of prices is sort of the range of money that is paid per kilowatt hour. The axis up and down is the price per kilowatt hour. Who here knows what they pay per kilowatt hour for electricity? Nice. This is an attuned, energy-conscious community. Most people have no idea what I'm talking about. Okay, so 100 years ago you paid a lot less, and now you pay quite a bit more. That's quite a growth curve, up and to the right over a century, and very consistent and steady. Again, the range is, you know, what you pay in Hawaii for electricity versus what you pay in Arizona for electricity. Two very different numbers. And just so you know, the reason I keep oil in King Kong, apart from the convenience of a valve, is that oil is still used for a lot of electricity in this country. Did you know that 90% of Hawaii's electricity is from burning diesel? So we send our young men to go and protect that supply line, and our blood and treasure is spent over the Middle East to power Hawaii with electricity, to keep air conditioners on for tourists when they have more solar resource than the rest of us combined, literally. And their state is so broke because of the diesel import balance of trade problem that they had to furlough teachers for a day a week, and most Hawaiian students the last couple of years have had 4 days of school a week. So we're miseducating our children to maintain our electricity supply because we're dependent on these dumb fossil fuel purveyors. I digress. Back to the graph. So it goes up over time. Right now there's a lot of hype in the media, a lot of noise about natural gas. We've discovered this new technology called fracking, and we're going to make it cheap forever. Kind of like nuclear power was going to be too cheap to meter. And that promise is a blip on the top line, because gas has broadly been the more expensive electricity supply in the American market, and it's come down a little bit in some places. Although, as you saw just over the winter, it's going back up, because it can't sit at $2 or $3 for the gas price. So, unless you believe that there's something that I don't know that's going to change that curve, fossil fuel electricity prices are going to go up over time. Along comes the American invention called the steam turbine, called the photovoltaic cell. The steam turbine is a British invention, and if for no other reason than it's British, we should use the American invention. And I can say that as an Australian. So along comes in 1954 the PV solar panel. I mean, this is making real what Einstein got his Nobel Prize to theorize, the photoelectric effect, back in 1916. But they did it in Bell Labs in New Jersey, and we've been selling them ever since. And they were very expensive per kilowatt hour for a long time because they were being deployed to space, and they had very particular applications, and a few of them got put in your calculator in the 1970s, if you remember. But there weren't mass production offerings, there weren't ways to scale them and make them cheaper. But at core, solar cells are a silicon semiconductor. They're very similar to the thing inside this, the silicon chip, which you've all benefited from being scaled in production and standardized and made into a mass volume commodity. And the power that comes out of the silicon chip is microprocessing power, the ability to crunch numbers, to do ones and zeros. I watched The Matrix last night when I got in. I was thinking about all those silicon chips behind those machines. So the silicon chip became so cheap that what was really expensive once, computing power, has become ubiquitous and virtually free. I mean, I saw a keg with an Android operating system recently. So this is a keg with a computer in it that it has more computing power than NASA had when we sent man to the moon. So that I can Facebook my friends when I drink too much. You know, like, this is really cool stuff that we've created here and made virtually free. And it's wonderful what's happening with it, because you can now get, this is an Android phone, an Android operating system phone for less than $100 in Africa. And kids are able to turn it on. For the first time, it experience all of literature. They don't need libraries to be built by Carnegie in Africa. They now just need one of these in their hands. And they can experience all of what the internet offers us, the commerce and the sharing and the communicating and the networking and all the rest. So it's a wonderful benefit to humanity. The same curve that has driven silicon chips is basically what silicon cells is going through. It's just a slightly wider form factor semiconductor. It's about 6 inches square rather than the little chips that microprocessors have etched on them. So it's an incredible curve, this one. And if you look at it, every doubling of volume has resulted in an 18% reduction in price. That's our version of Moore's law in the solar industry. We call it Swanson's law because the guy that started SunPower, the American manufacturer, sort of described that function. So every doubling drops 18%, which translates from a hardware into a service cost and the price per kilowatt hour. And so the price per kilowatt hour is now, for my business, these are real numbers that I can tell you, 17 cents a kilowatt hour that I sell electricity for. Those people that said they knew what they paid for a kilowatt hour of electricity, who pays more than 17 cents a kilowatt hour? Only a couple of people in this room. And that probably reflects the states that fracking is strong in. Of the American population, about 13% currently pay more than 17 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. We're going to make that cheaper year on year, just as it has been since 1954. Your electricity from the grid is going to become more expensive year on year, just as it has since 1894. Therefore, we are the least cost option, and we're better. You know, the other reason that these things have dominated the telephony market is because they do telephony better. You're no longer connected to a wall. Do you remember that? You no longer have to dial that rotary dial. You can do all these things. This has displaced the torch, the radio, the Walkman, the library, the television. We provide services better with this technology for less, and we win. That's why solar will win. So really, if nothing else, you get from this, I'm going to be finishing up now, it's that, we're winning. The forces to change are overcoming the status quo. Deus is going to defeat King Kong. Just to give you some factoids from the here and now as to this being true, coal, like I said, is crashing. I mean, like, this is an historical economic change from 50% at the start of the 21st century to about a third today. In a decade, that's a pretty big decline for a pretty strong, dominant, powerful industry. You know, the type that built robber barons back in the early days of the United States. That's a very precipitous decline. Likewise, just to reinforce that we're not going through a nuclear renaissance, nuclear power in the last year, these are actual figures from the Energy Information Administration, went below 20% for the first time last year. Nukes are on the way out. Wind and solar installed 75 gigawatts. Forget about the gigawatt, if you don't know what that is. That's more than nuclear has installed in the last 25 years. That was wind and solar last year. So, you know, anyone that hypes nuclear's return is not actually reading the newspaper. The only good news for the old-fashioned way of getting electricity was that natural gas grew. And it did grow quite significantly. It grew at a decent clip, 20%, which is for a big business, 20% year-on-year growth, a decent result for the investors and others involved in it. That's on your back. That's at your expense. That's what you're suffering, their growth. And I'm sorry for that. That's what we need to stop. But that is true that they've had some level of resurgence in this market because of this new technology called fracking. But is it growing too fast? Is it going to eclipse the sun? Is it going to stop this inevitable transition to the distributed energy utility solutions of solar plus storage plus all the rest of the good clean stuff? And the answer is no. While it's growing fast, it's not growing nearly as fast as we are. We're growing from a very small base, but it's an incredible rate of growth. And that's what's really interesting to investors and capital. They like growth. They like to make their money back and then some. We're doing much better than 20%. In fact, wind and solar combined were 72% of all new electric additions last year. So you know how you were suffering all this onslaught when you're fighting fracking about, oh, but natural gas, it's good and it's growing and it's America's resurgence and all that. Well, actually, it was like a third of new additions. And the other 2/3 were clean energy additions. That needs to be known better. Obviously, we need to tell that story more, but don't you forget that gas is not winning this race. This year seems to be starting even more dramatically. I can't believe this, but the EIA says it's true. In January of 2013, 1,200 megawatts, 1.2 gigawatts, that's a big coal plant, a big nuclear plant, were added into the grid. And for the first time that I know of, I think probably the first time ever in the history of electricity, none of that was from coal. It was all out of biomass. And a month does not make a trend, you know, and even a year does not make a trend. But I think January 2013, we should remember, that may be the turning of the tide. We may be in that cusp of time where you don't even know it. You're on a boat and the tide's shifted, and it takes a little while to get sucked the other direction. But that's what's happening in the world around us. And I can give you more stats for the rest of the world. This is just the United States to suggest that's true. Even solar, you know, I'm defensive about solar because it's my business, right? It starts very small. We're less than 1%, like I said. According to the Energy Information Administration, we're still only 0.1%, but they admit that they don't actually count the rooftop installations, which is like missing the point. But I want to remind people what an exponential curve does. It's about the rate of doubling. Like, it's doubling every year or so, and it goes from 0.1 to 0.2 to 0.4 to 0.8 to 1.6, 3.2, and within 10 doublings, you're 100% of supply. Just to remind yourself in your own visceral experience what that kind of curve is like. Who has a cell phone? All right, ask a different way. Who doesn't have a cell phone? There was some speaker this morning that didn't have one. So one person out of 300 doesn't have a cell phone. Who had a cell phone 10 years ago? Who had a cell phone 20 years ago? Wow, interesting. So think about that. Think about the landline telephone companies, Bell, how around 2000, they would have just been sitting there going, that cell phone stuff, I don't think anyone's going to go for that. I don't know. It's kind of like the IBM executive who said, oh, no one will ever need personal computers. Mainframe computers, that's the way to go. They got run over by cell phones. They got run over by personal computing. That's what this modular technology built on a silicon semiconductor is going to do to those guys. So it's good news. Even though natural gas supply grew to nearly a third, we've grown to nearly an eighth. An eighth is 12%. So we're about 20 points behind, growing much faster, coming up behind, catching up with them quickly. What I'm here to say to you is thank you for your work holding them down, keeping that back. If we can leave that gas, oil, coal in the ground for the next 5 years, the economics of that curve, the driver of economic destruction, which is market capitalism, will, like cell phones to landlines, mean